Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Bot, where we go beyond the headlines and explore the world of AI and robotics and what it means for you and your business. I'm Tony.
And I'm Steven.
And we're here in the Blue Sky Lab, and we're joined by Marisa Porto, the Night Chair for Local News and Sustainability at UNC Chapel Hill. Marisa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So before we jump into the topic here, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what your relationship with news and artificial intelligence is?
All right. Well, I've spent most of my career in newsrooms covering small communities around the country and leading newsrooms and then leading news businesses for companies in the United States. And here, I've been here for 3 years. I'm the night chair in local news. I focus my time and attention on the intersection between journalism and sustainability and innovation. And the last few years, I've been studying AI and how it's changing the business model.
So AI is a huge topic in the realm of innovation and creating content, right? And, you know, we talk a lot about internally about artificial intelligence as a driver of business value, but today we really want to focus on the creative applications of AI and what some of those might look like. So when we talk about AI art, what exactly are we talking about here?
So we're talking about, it's a broad spectrum, right? It's everything from poetry to stories to videos to music, right? Everything that is creative is AI art, and that is what we're looking at today and what we're using in our classrooms, right, to teach our students.
So when we look at, generative AI, Stephen, specifically, on the business front, there are a lot of ways that we can use this, right? What are some of the applications that a business might be looking to accomplish with generative AI?
Well, I think before I answer that question, I might want to say that there's an argument over, is generative or AI art really art, right? Is the creative process and does it make things, so how do we define art is essentially, but let's just assume we're going to call it art because it makes a visual image or it makes something that makes us think. And so there is business value to that. People can make a t-shirt and they can sell that t-shirt. And so now all of a sudden people are like, oh, I can make things really quickly. They don't have to have all that talent or skill that they needed before. And so now they're able to do things because they have an idea and they can use generative AI to generate that idea that then they can try to sell and make money with.
So, Marissa, when we, kind of focus in on that application, if we are, generating an image using artificial intelligence, we've kind of cut a creative person out of that equation in some ways. And what are the ethical implications of that?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of ethical implications of what we're doing with AI, right? First, they're really twofold. The first is, what is AI using for you to be able to go in there and give it a prompt and spit something back at you, right? Is it copyrighted material? And is that copyrighted material, do they have permission to use it? Or do they not have permission to use it? In which case, they're undercutting the economic value of this content, right? So that's the first issue. And then the second real issue is that, as you're developing something using AI, at what point does it become something more than generated AI, something that is really has artistic value, that has, human interaction in it? What's the point there at which it becomes a creative endeavor?
And so if we go back to our t-shirt example, for instance, right, what really is that point where it becomes a new creation and not something that, anybody can just go and print that image? At what point is it actually copyrightable?
Well, I think from my perspective, it's one of those things that maybe even the moment that it's generated. Now, the courts can argue over this, but the moment it was generated was based on a concept I had. So I had an idea for a t-shirt. I really did. And I was basically like, our robots suck. Okay, that was the concept we were going with. And I kind of came up, I wanted it comic style. I wanted it to have the big PAL kind of icon about it. And I crafted this thing till I got it the exact colors I wanted. And then I got it and I thought I had it, right? And then I used it. I made it, and now someone else has copied the idea, okay? Do I own the copyright on that? I don't know. I like to think that I do, but, ultimately, I could have sold the t-shirt. I didn't, right? But if I did sell the t-shirt, then all of a sudden I'd be losing money on that. So I think the moment that I created the prompt, I have created something that didn't exist before, so therefore I should be able to have the copyright on that. But people like to argue over that.
Right. I mean, and this is a global issue, right? It isn't just in the United States. This conversation is happening around the world. And the issue becomes, how much creative work was put into the prompt. So the courts are still sort of diving into this. But the Copyright Office at the Library of Congress has said in January that if there's a significant human creative input into the content of the AI, then it is possible it could be copyrighted. So as an example, if I prompt Chat GPT by saying, and you could fill in any number of those, right? So any number of tools. But if I prompt it, used a prompt, and I said, give me a photo or a picture of, generate an image of a dog on a skateboard, right? That prompt is just a prompt. But then if I say, maybe I want the dog to be, I like collies, so a collie, and I want it to have 5 puppies, and I want it to have a green beret, and I want it to have, and I did some back and forth about what that dog needed to look like and what color it was. Now you're starting to get into beyond the first prompt. You're starting to get into using a tool with human input and expression. And that is where the copyright in the United States in January, they decided that that could be copyrighted. Now, who makes the decision and at what point? That's the question right now. So,
well, Marissa, I want to hone back in on one thing that you said a moment ago, which is that this question is twofold. Not just that can the output be copyrighted, but is it being influenced by inputs that might have been copyrighted?
Yes.
So if we go back to our T-shirt example, if I say I want a picture of a dog on a skateboard in, say, Studio Ghibli style or in the style of Salvador Dali, does that change the copyright implications, and does it change the ethical implications of using that art?
Yes. So the New York Times and some other news organizations are now suing Microsoft for this very reason, right? They're saying Microsoft used that content that is copyrighted by the New York Times, and they, allowed their tools to be trained by it. And therefore, anything that's being output that has a New York Times style to it or feels similar to a story really was used without permission. So what you see now is, on the one side, organizations like the New York Times suing for that. And then on the other side, some organizations, news organizations and media organizations actually finding a way to do contract their content, whatever their content is, and have the AI organization, company, give them money for the use of that for training purposes. So those are sort of the economic and legal things that are happening in the world today.
Because it's really complicated. Because if I say I want to make this in Salvador Dali style, then I had to have looked at a Salvador Dali painting to do that. Now, if I were the artist and I copy his style, the courts have said that an artist doesn't own that style. But in the case of the AI part, they had to study and take in that without permission in most cases is what's happening. And so therefore, it's like you made a derivative of something you probably shouldn't have had access to in the first place. And that's where it really gets complicated as to like what this thing is and kind of who has access and rights to it. So if I do it in the New York Times style, does the New York Times now get a few pennies every time I want to make something in New York Times style? That I think the courts are going to have to figure that out.
Right. And there's a term called fair use, and fair use is a legal term, and it essentially says if I'm taking some information and I'm transforming it in some way. So let's say I read something or see something and I decide to use it and transform it. This is outside of AI. I transform it into, let's say, a column, right? I read something in the New York Times. I thought, oh, this is really interesting. I use some of the information, not word for word, but for a column of writing that's either pro or con. That's a transformative use, right? So that's called fair use of that content. And companies are arguing, right? The AI companies are arguing, well, letting us train our AI bots on content, that's a fair use. And so that's really what the courts are going to have to figure out right now.
Well, and notable to that example, it's attributed, right? In that case, you're saying this is information that I got from a New York Times article. But that's not always the case with AI. Right. And so, for example, Stephen, from a business perspective, as a person who comes up with a lot of creative solutions, how would you feel if an AI chatbot was able to, parse those solutions and serve them to people without your will or knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, we come up with a solution, we share that with a client. The client then took it and built it on their own. That's really frustrating. Okay.
Right.
The same thing is happening in AI every day. but it's a collective and you may not be aware of it. Right. And so as a business owner, and as we're trying to figure out the future of this, I think business owners are going to have to decide, how much do I share publicly? Is there going to be some way of me saying, no, this content is not available to AI bots, for example? Is this something that I want to have some way of protecting? We don't have a good way to do that, but I think it'll be up to people, maybe the University of North Carolina, your husband's school should come up with that, right? Maybe there has to be some way that we do protections of these and give people the choice to opt in, opt out, those types of things.
And I mean, I would say there are businesses already that are building their own AI models, right? We just had someone from Bloomberg, a UNC grad, speaking in my media economics class, and one of the things she said is that Bloomberg has a closed system, so it puts in its own system Bloomberg content, and only allows Bloomberg content because it already knows that Bloomberg content has been vetted, and so you can't get into the system from outside, but inside the company you can get into. So you see those sort of closed systems developing now.
Now, Marissa and Stephen, there are a lot of things that we can do to protect copyrighted materials moving forward, but a lot of AI companies have kind of made this argument that the toothpaste is out of the tube, so to speak. There are already massive libraries of open source materials that have been used to train these models. And so is this even a relevant question? Or is there a way to go back? Or, where do we go from here, given that that's, sort of the bell's already been rung, so to speak?
Well, I think that is a challenging question. So, and you have to look at it with the vantage point of the United States, and then you have to look at it from a global perspective. So here in the United States, we sort of have a little bit of the Wild West feeling about regulating business. And it's continued, right? This administration is very much anti-regulation for business. And so you see some of those guardrails coming down for different types of businesses. But you also have, in the EU, there's a very significant, guardrails around the use of AI and how the ethical uses of AI and how it will be rolled out and when it's rolled out. All of those things that EU has built into its laws, and here that we could be affected by that based on business. So that's a whole conversation that I was having a few weeks ago with some folks from a German university who were visiting here. How do you change the law? Can you put the genie back in the bottle? And what would cause the states to actually consider different legislation? And it seems like the conversation was that if business had to go into another country where there's different legislation, then that might prompt the United States to think about what that legislation should be here.
Yeah, this is really a business thing, right? Like, as a human, I can't unsee something that I've seen.
Absolutely.
But as a trained model, as a piece of code that has been received and data has been collected, we can retrain things and no longer use that model, right? So, but that doesn't make it financially smart, right? So a company is going to fight all they can. It's a whole lot cheaper to pay lawyers to defend this than it will be to retrain and remove all that and to keep getting the value that they're expecting out of it. So I think if the courts decide it, yes, technically we can put the toothpaste back in the tube, as you said, right? Because we will just use a different tube, right? Like, we'll have to do things differently. And so I think there's a way to do it, but financially, it's not in the company's best interest, nor is it in the best interest of innovation. The question is innovation versus your rights.
Right.
And there's a lot of these things.
And let's be honest, ethics, right?
Right.
I mean, how is this technology going to be used in an ethical way? I mean, right now, some of the issues that we have in AI, that it's being used for deepfakes, right? And deepfakes are particularly challenging if you were, let's be frank, if you're a female, because a lot of what's happening in that deepfake area is sort of sexualized content for celebrities, particularly women, right? So what are the ethics of not having AI guidelines? And the United States is right at the cusp of thinking about what to do about deepfakes. And I hope we do something useful for those sort of guidelines. But those ethics are really important to think about, even if the genie is out of the bottle.
And there are certainly examples like that where there is a clear, wrong approach and a clear right approach, right? But it does seem like even for businesses and creators and individuals that, have the best intentions and want to do things in an ethical and legal way, there maybe is some gray area where the right choice is not always as clear. And, Stephen, from your perspective as a business owner, that level of uncertainty is famously bad for business, right? Sure. And so, I guess my question to you is twofold. First of all, from a business perspective, how do you navigate that uncertain environment? And then from a regulation perspective, what can be done to remove that gray area and kind of provide some clear guidance for folks?
Yeah. I think we're going to have to see the courts decide. We're going to have to see precedent. Once we have precedent, then we can make policies and kind of move these forwards, and businesses will be able to know where they can operate. That's going to take time. So I think we're going to see is businesses are going to start and businesses are going to fail. Businesses are going to get acquired, and things are all going to happen as these things happen. And technology is going to change faster than policy. And that always has happened, right? That throughout history, technology moves faster than policy. And so we have to figure this out, and hopefully we're driven by good ethical standards and we follow those things.